The following is a presentation of the Mat Talk Podcast Network.
It's time to attack. With the Attack Style Wrestling Podcast. Here on the Attack Style Wrestling Podcast, you'll find youth and high school coaching tips for coaches, parents, and wrestlers, featuring Gable-trained NCAA champion and Hall of Fame high school coach Daryl Weber. Also featured is a monthly dialogue with legendary wrestling coach Dan Gable. Find out more on AttackStyleWrestling.com. Now, on to the show. Back again on the Attack Style Wrestling Podcast at AttackStyleWrestling.com. NCAA champion, high school Hall of Fame coach Daryl Weber joining us again, continuing our discussion about techniques. And today we're talking about things from the top position, how to work those in practice. But before we even talk about the top position, Daryl, you practice and you teach bottom positions before you really focus on the top positions. Why should they pay attention? Why should athletes and coaches go, all right, we need to learn the bottom before we can get on the top?
Yeah, I mean, I think as you're bringing an athlete or a team along, you got to show a little bit from each position to get them, to be able to survive and score and get things going. But I think that, I think top position, number one, is probably technically the easiest to learn. And I'll get into why I think that in a little bit. But so you can kind of put it on the back burner. I think one of the first things you need to learn or teach your wrestlers is how to tee off and pin somebody properly. So, get chest to chest and then maybe a half Nelson, give them one option so that when they're getting takedowns, they have something to go to. And if they do get somebody on their back, they know how to actually pin them in probably one of the most common situations that they're going to get in. So I think it's one of the first things you should teach is how to seal the deal and get that pin, because that's the ultimate in wrestling. But then, you want to get, you want to give them at least a fundamental base in the bottom position, and then start using the teaching tactics that I talked about in that podcast to start getting reps, because you need to get more reps. You need to get more experience in the bottom position before it really carries over into that those live match instincts. So that's why you want to kind of introduce a little bit more of the bottom position probably before you sink your teeth into top. If you're trying for overall development, because it's going to take more reps to get those fundamentals and those basics down in the bottom position than it actually does in the top position.
So if you're coming across the top position practice details on this particular episode, go back, listen to the previous episode on bottom position, and Coach Weber will explain situations, drills, warm-ups, techniques, and the situational developments with that particular set of wrestling. And I do think that if we're teaching top first, I think it makes some assumptions, some rather borderline cocky assumptions that you're going to assume that your kid's going to be on top like that. I mean, before you even get to, you've got to teach them the takedown. You talked about, finishing things off, but you're assuming, well, we're going to be on top. We're going to get the takedown. Well, chances are if you're first timer out there, you're going to get taken down a lot more than you're going to be taking people down.
Yeah, and if you've been around a while and you like winning, you're going to figure out that your wrestlers are going to struggle in the bottom position more than anything. So you better teach them the fundamentals, and you better start getting some real reps and some situational wrestling, some sparring, cross those skills over as quickly as possible, because it's going to take a while. It's going to take a while for them to develop those things. And like I said, you can give some youth and high school wrestlers a few options from the top position and start working them, and they'll start having success with it. Whereas, like I said, it's going to take longer. It's going to take longer, and you're going to lose some matches if you're not focusing on that bottom position.
As we talk about the practice positioning of this, we always start with the warm-up. And when you're teaching a top position practice, what type of things do you include in your warm-up? Yeah, so
we've talked about this already. You got your warm up, you got your drilling sessions, you got your technique, and then your live wrestling, and all those are components of your practice. And during the warm up, I've talked about this. I like to do my calisthenics, get the bodies warmed up, and I always like to work in some kind of solo drill, whether it's stance and motion, working on sprawling and penetration step and stuff like that, your neutral skills, or whether it's your base building, your explosion, your chain wrestling, solo drills for the bottom position. And those for the warm-up portion, that's typically going to be what you're working on. There's not a whole lot of skills that I probably use, solo drill skills for the top position. That's going to be, and like I said, it kind of works out because you need more reps in the neutral position. They're more complicated techniques. They're harder to cross over to live wrestling. Same with the bottom wrestling. So you need to be putting more time in, more reps into those. So that's where in the warm up, you're typically working your solo drills in with that warm up routine from the top or from the bottom and the neutral position.
So as we move into the real drills, a lot of this in your practice plan is the chain wrestling, because when you're on the top position, you're looking to keep your opponent down, but you're also looking to score points, and you got to go from hold to hold to hold to hold to hold. Now, before we even get to that chain wrestling, you've got to develop drills to create that muscle memory. What are some drills that you incorporate in your practice plans that really teach that chain wrestling ability to go from hold to hold to hold to hold and really train one's body to get ready to jump in those positions?
Yeah. So, obviously, like you said, you got to teach the techniques first, and you're always teaching in a chain wrestling fashion and building off of, building a series. But I think the drills are really good. What I like to incorporate into my drills when I'm working top, and we talked about this in the bottom podcast. And we talked about having a base maintenance type drill where you had to hold your base. And the same thing is kind of reverse on top. You got to especially beginning wrestlers, young wrestlers, high school wrestlers, they get in trouble in the top position when they're trying to turn their opponents, maybe when they still have their base underneath of them, or they're getting up to their feet. If you can program your wrestlers to break somebody down, keep them down, and then, they might take an ankle and break their opponent down, or chop them and break them down. But then they need to learn how to do that. But then they need to learn how to keep the forward pressure on their opponent, keep them pinned down. And also, their opponent might build back up on them, how to break them back down again. So I like to incorporate that forward pressure, being able to just continually break your opponent down in these drills. And then, so rather than just say, okay, let's go out and we're going to drill, whatever, chicken wings, whatever it is. Break them down this way, turn them over. I like to teach them, make sure they understand the breakdown, the turns, and sitting in the chain wrestling, all that. But then as quickly as possible, we're going to take them to drills where the bottom guys, picking up the pace, maybe going 50, 60, 70%, and they're trying to get back off their belly. So you got to be able to keep them pinned down and then hit the technique, the turn. There's some turns that you'll hit when an opponent had the bottom wrestler is on their base or even standing up. But I think to lay the foundation to keep them out of trouble as much as possible, those new wrestlers, and same with when you get to high level wrestling, the more you got two nationally ranked wrestlers or two state champs going against each other, the bottom wrestler is more likely to get out when they're on their base. So if you can teach your top wrestler to relentlessly keep that forward pressure, relentlessly trying to get handles near wrists, throw halves in, break them down to their belly, keeping that forward pressure on them, just the better they're going to get in that top position. And, the more they're going to turn guys, because, eventually if you develop that relentless pressure through these drills, most wrestlers in the bottom position, they're going to stop fighting after a while. It's a dog fight. And if they stop fighting to get to their base, well, then you can really put the hurt on them.
There are any universal drills that you've discovered that work well for system type of wrestling coaches where, out in Colorado, I experienced that there was a team that really was big on the 2-on-1 roll through tilt, the Fairfax roll, the hazard tilt, whatever you want to call it. And then you go to New Jersey and like Camden Catholic with Gary Papa for a long time. The guy's the master of leg riding. And then you've got a team that's really big on double bars and arm bars that just like to rip your shoulders off. When you're looking at those different types of offensive techniques that kind of are systematic, what type of drills do you find work across no matter what type of techniques the coach likes to prefer?
Yeah, you're exactly right. The best programs are predictable, especially, in the top position. The good high school program, you know that they're a good program year in and year out when, like you said, they're known for cradles or they're known for leg riding or they're known for this. and they're going to do it, but you just can't stop it. And those aren't, I wouldn't say that that's achieved with universal drills. It's the coach saying, hey, we're going to get good at this system, this turn system, and we're just going to sink our teeth into it, because the top position is you're starting at an advantage. So you can teach guys to really take advantage of it if you're really sinking your teeth into one thing. And that's one thing that I see a lot of wrestlers or coach or teams don't get good in the top positions, because they try to learn too many series, too many holds, or even in their breakdowns, or they try to ankle a guy down on the whistle. They don't get that. Well, then they try something else. You get the top position is all about attitude. I mean, you can teach a half Nelson series, give them one or two breakdowns, give them a couple options from a half Nelson, and then just get them mean and nasty with it, and you're going to get a lot of pins. You can pick. I always say everybody needs to know a cradle series. I mean, cradles are the deadliest hold in wrestling. Everybody, the best wrestlers out there, during a match, you're probably at some point in that match, your head and knee are close enough to get a cradle slapped on you. So I think everybody needs to know some cradles. Plus, off of front headlocks, head in the hole cradle is one of the best techniques out there, I believe, especially for youth in high school. So you got to know that, and then you got to know your your basic meat and potato turns. You got to know a half Nelson. I think you got to know a crossface series. You got to know. You probably should. If you get a little more advanced, your chicken wings. And then you can really sink your teeth into something else. You can just sink your teeth into those and get really, really good and dominate with those. But then, like you said, then maybe once they have those basics down, they understand how to slap a cradle on, how to finish it. They know how to run a half. They know how to run a chicken wing. They know how to do a barbed wire from a crossface, break a guy down, do that, because that's the easiest pin in the book. Then maybe you sink your teeth into a cross wrist series where you're learning tilts and Steiner tilts, or you're doing a near wrist series. And this might be something that's broken up amongst a team too. You might have your big guys getting really good at near wrist series, and your middle weights and lower weights doing cross wrists. But you're right. You got to kind of have your foundation on what really works, what's been proven to work, what's deadly, and then really sink your teeth into something. And over the years when I was coaching, that thing that we would sink our teeth into, it would change every couple of years, because everybody would get in tune and be like, oh, they do the money tilt, the roll through tilt all the time. Okay, well, everybody's thinks we're going to do that this year. Let's sink our teeth into this series. So you change it up sometimes from year to year as well. But you got to have veteran wrestlers that have been around a while to do that. They got to have a good foundation under them.
Yeah, I remember my senior in high school, Billy Ruff was going with it wasn't a pinning hold, but it was a near fall hold. It was, it was slow, it was meticulous, and you'd sit there, you'd almost have the bar arm to the near side, and then you'd crawl up the opposing shoulder, and you come up and you'd tilt it over. I mean, they were past the 45 degrees, but basically it was a hold to kind of wear you down. And it scored near fall points. You weren't going to pin anybody with it, but it was definitely something that we worked on, at least the better guys on the team. I spent most of my time getting thrown into a wall. But, we saw that from our better wrestlers. And then you'd see, and as I went and started covering wrestling nationally, I'm curious on how, when you get into this, maybe goes into situational top work, but I'm going to use Great Bridge for an example in their heyday with Coach Martin there, when they'd take their teams up to the Beast of the East, and then their guys would run into Jeff Buxton's Blair Academy guys. And a lot of the country didn't know how to really contend with keeping these Great Bridge guys down on bottom, except for Jeff Buxton. As good as Daniel Frischkorn was, he could not get away from Corey Cooperman. It was just one of those things that the coaching style, this guy knew what was coming. He knew how to teach it. So when you get into a situation where you're going into an event, you've got a week ahead for a duel, and you're going to meet a team that's a roll team or a team that is a tilt team. What situational top positions can you do to offset, that bottom work that these teams are really good at? Because I don't think I ever saw a Blair Academy kid get rolled.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. You have to, a good coach is going to teach their team the foundations. They're going to get good at what they want to get good at. And then you got to know what's coming. And you've got to be able to, a good coach is going to neutralize those things really quick. I mean, if I know I got a leg riding team, I got a little scenario I'm going to work that week in leg riding, and we're going to beat them at their own game. Granby system. I mean, the reason the Granby system isn't huge as you get better and better is because it's not that hard to shut down. You can, if you know how to control the hips and do a couple things on the whistle, you're going to shut down a Granby guy. But across the board, if you get a team really good at the Granby system and a coach doesn't know how to handle that when they face them, they can just wreak havoc on you. But Coach Buxton coached his guys up, and he had really talented guys. So they adjusted. You get a game plan. You're going to go against a team that does X, Y, Z. Well, you got to have a little system, a little game plan that's gonna. You don't want to consume yourself. You don't want to change your style. You just have to tweak things. Maybe if you got a Granby team, one thing that stops a Granby team, is just something there's things you can do right on the whistle that just shuts their stuff down. And they have counters to these things within their system, but they typically don't see people throwing this stuff at them. So you can shut a whole team down really quick with just little things. It's in leg riders. I have a little pinch and catch series on the whistle when we wrestle, because teams that throw legs, wrestlers that get really good at leg riding, especially in high school and youth, they got to have the legs in. They're not really at the highest. When you look at it as somebody that competed at a high level, they're really not that good at the legs. They just dominate people a lot of times at youth and high school because people don't know what to do. So when they got to have the legs in, they're coming with them usually, and you can do some things to use them against them. A good coach is going to have their system down, be getting good at their things, but you're going to be scouting your opponents, and the good teams, the good programs, you got to know. I mean, even like when I was at Christiansburg, you had to be ready for Franklin County because they were going to be throwing headlocks at you.
Headlocks and cradles from Franklin County.
Yeah.
Oh, man. And they were nasty with them, too.
If you didn't practice staying out of headlocks or rolling guys through or, beating those headlocks, if you didn't practice it that week, then you went in and one or two guys got caught in a headlock and pinned. But if you just gave them a couple tactics to stay out of it and to deal with it, and you're usually okay.
It's amazing that you bring up Franklin County. It's like every year there was and it wasn't like, the old grade school reach back and whip them over. I mean, these were taught very, very, very well with some very, very rough blue collar kids that just love dropping people on their heads. So that makes that move even that much more dangerous.
Yeah. I mean, they decided they were going to get their guys good at headlocks, and they were good at them, but there's certain things that you can get your wrestlers really good at, but they're only going to work to certain level, it's certain heights, sometimes. So, but that's a very good coaching point right there. Is you gotta be scouting your opponents, and you don't want to change your whole game plan up. You just got to have a little system, little tactical game plan to neutralize their best stuff.
Now, we've kind of morphed the drills and techniques into one segment here, but as we get to the techniques, you talked about how they're usually part of a series. Like, you chop the arm, you chop that with the drill, and then now you're just going the chop, the far wrist, the near wrist, whichever wrist it may be, to go to, say, Pennsylvania, they like the 2-on-1 tilt. They, our friend Brian Hazard, the Hazard tilt in Northern Virginia is kind of how that was known, kind of the same basic thing as sometimes you go like that. But when you're drilling the techniques in part of the series, and then you go into that sparring and situational, how hard is it for the bottom guy? And we didn't really address this on the bottom position because we're focusing more on the bottom guy being learning positions to get out. But now being the good practice partner for the top guy to really get them to understand how these positions work from top, because you've got to have the right wrestling based reaction from a practice partner. If the bottom guy knows what's coming and he's kind of, okay, you're not going to get this, and they're not reacting the way that a wrestler should react, that can cause some problems with teaching the technique and the situational drilling.
Yeah, you're exactly right. So when you're teaching technique from top position, you always want to, I always start with, there's things that just go together. For instance, like I said earlier, if you can ankle a guy down, throw a crossface, and run a barbed wire, that's the quickest, least complicated pin hold in wrestling, in my book, from the top position. And so you always start with whatever series you're going to start working. You start with the easiest version. Easiest, start with the one breakdown, turn them over, pin them with that skill, and then you start addressing the most common defenses to them. So that's where you're right. You got to have the bottom wrestler. That's part of the technique. When you're teaching technique is, okay, we're going to break them down. We're going to throw a crossface. We're going to try to run a barbed wire. Oh, but he brings the outside knee up. We can't run the barbed wire. Okay, so if the bottom guy doesn't bring the outside knee up in that situation, well, then we just run the barbed wire. We get the easiest pin in wrestling. But if he brings the outside knee up, well, then we're going to crossface cradle him. Okay, now we can't crossface cradle him. We do this, So yeah, you're exactly right. And that's why you got to get nitpicky, and you got to be really diligent with your wrestlers so that they are giving the right reactions. They're doing all the little things correctly, because you're in the advantage position, in the top position. You should be doing everything right, because you see so many kids just cut little corners, little parts of techniques, and they don't get good at pinning, and they don't think it works, and then they just want to cut guys. And if you're not seeing the value in being a good, tough rider and getting pins, and even tilts, if you get a little tilt series, you should always have some way you're leading to a pin. But in a tough match, it's third period, it's a point, it's 2 points, and all of a sudden you tilt them for 3. Oh, you could be looking at a pin in that scenario because or at least a major, because they might start breaking on you. Whereas if they're within a point or two all the time, they're just going to fight that much harder. So yeah, you're always teaching in starting with the easiest version, building a series off of common counters and kind of chain reactions that you'll see in those series. And it doesn't have to get, a 2, 3, 4 deep series from the top position. You get really good at it, and it's solid. It's a solid series. You can take that a long, long ways. You can get a lot of pins with it.
You just mentioned, the pin and a tilt, which is extremely rare because most of the guys in the bottom position are fighting out of the position. But one of your wrestlers actually did this while in college, while wrestling at Virginia Tech. Matt Epperly, who we had talked about on previous programs, he was wrestling Mike Benefield from Oklahoma State, got a tilt, it pinned him in the tilt, and then ultimately won Virginia Tech that dual meet, and they made the national duels finals. So that's something from a top position coaching thing is, when you're late in a match, it's like getting the takedown in overtime and being aware that if the guy gives up, pounce, you can get the fall. Or, you're getting the tilt late, just keep at it, because the guy might just give up. And next thing you know, in college, especially 1 second, boom. The top position guy also has to be aware of that situation in these sparring and play wrestling staples to be like, okay, I can get a fall here if this guy relaxes. How much of that goes into this top position practice teaching?
Oh yeah, it's just like when it comes to teaching top, or just like any other position, I'm a stickler at all the little things, so that we're programming. So I know exactly what you're talking about. We call it a money tilt. People call it a roll through tilt, the hazard tilt, like you said. What's it, George Mason tilt? I think people call it
Fairfax roll, Mason tilt. Yeah,
yeah, Mason tilt.
Brian Hazard gets a lot of credit for that for some reason.
Yeah. So if you hit that tilt on somebody, and our teams were really good at that for a while, and you know how to bring your elbow up and push the near shoulder down, you'll get a pin. But most people don't work on that. But that was part of our technique. When we worked the money tilt, it was always as you were tilting and getting your backs, you were always lifting that elbow, trying to push that near shoulder down to get the pin. And then if you didn't get the pin there, you got your 5 count. Well, you released him to his belly and put a ball and chain on him, pin with a ball and chain. There's always, every tilt we ever worked in practice at the high school level always led to a pin in some fashion. And look, it paid off right there, and it paid off for us a bunch throughout the years. But yeah, that's definitely how I believe you need to be need to be teaching techniques from the top position is you're always going to the pin. You're always going to the pin.
Yeah, how do you work those in those situational, in that play wrestling and that sparring role where, okay, the kids have got their positions, the kids have got situations that they really like, that they're drilling. You like them as a coach, whether it's as we said, the entire wrist, whether it's bars, whether it's tilts, whatever we want to do. How do you set those up in situational positions to say, okay, now this is where the learning begins? I mean, how do you set up that situation so it's beneficial for the top athlete?
Yeah, I mean, usually you can start them. Use a half Nelson for example. You could just put the bottom wrestler on his belly, put in a half. Top guy puts in a half, gets out to the side, maybe has a far wrist, and you start him from there. And that's pretty dominant position. Top guy should be, winning that situation most of the time. And bottom wrestler needs to be able to deal with that because they're probably going to end up there sometime or another. But yeah, you start, and then maybe you put him in a half Nelson. You put the bottom guy on his knees. You give them the most common looks that they're going to see. But when you're doing this, you got to make sure, and this happens all the time. Like I talked about earlier, there's certain turns from the top position that everybody needs to be good at. So your half Nelsons, your cross faces, your cradles. If you tell me that you don't like cradles, I'm not a cradle guy, and you get a cradle locked up and let it go because you're not a cradle guy, well, I'm going to be pretty pissed off at you. So you get kids in your room that you'll put them in these situations, and they're like, oh, well, I'm good at this. I'm a chicken wing guy. I don't really like cradles. I don't use them. Well, if I put you in a situation in practice and I blow the whistle, it's a 20-second go, you get to start with a cradle, and you don't think you're a cradle guy, you're a chicken wing guy, and I blow the whistle and you let go of that cradle and try going to chicken wing, I'm going to be pissed. So when you put them in these situations, you got to address that. You got to say, listen, you don't let go of your cradle. You're going to turn the guy at the cradle. You're going to learn that position. That's how they grow as wrestlers. And typically they'll be doing that. But, if you've coached high school wrestling for any amount of time, you get some bullheaded kids, and you got to kind of push them and stay on them to grow as wrestlers and add stuff to their arsenal. So to me, the best way to get good in the top position is you show them the techniques, you show them the series, have them go through, like you say, the bottom wrestlers reacting properly, and then you get to those live situations as quickly as possible. When I was talking about bottom wrestling, I think it can hurt if you go straight from the technique straight to situational. It's too easy for the top guy to start with an advantage and just pin the guy down, bottom wrestler down, so they don't learn anything. So you got to kind of work that sparring in between. But to get good at the top position, I think it's really beneficial to put them in those live scenarios and then coach them. So put them in these situations, do a couple goes and see what's going on. And then you might stop them and have them work on, a part of the technique that they're not hitting. And that's the reason that they're not getting those pins or those turns, or maybe work on defensive. Maybe they're turning them too easy and you got to work on the defense a little bit so the bottom guy can give them some better reactions. But coach them in those scenarios, and that's how you get good in the top position. And really, like I said, top position is the easiest once they get the techniques down. It comes down to attitude and breaking guys down and just drilling things properly, understanding all the little parts of the technique. And there will be times where with a better team that kind of has been exposed to 4 or 5 good top series. When I was coaching high school, you could see whatever we worked that week is what we were getting pins with that weekend. So it really is just spending time, and it doesn't take a whole lot of time. One practice during a week, if you just take the time to really, and I'm pretty militant when I teach top, because I don't want them just rolling over on the bottom. Like you said, I want them giving the proper reaction, and it's so important to just have the little things down for the pins. Your elbow here. Whether you get the pin or the back points or not, a lot of times is your lock in the right spot, is or you got the right pressure on their arm, or just little things. So you got to be pretty militant about the drilling in the top position.
Been talking with Darrell Weber about top position practice details. We go through the warm-up, the drills, the techniques, and the sparring and the situations that go behind it. This all available at attackstylewrestling.com. Coach Weber, final thoughts on what the listeners out there can get with Attack Style Wrestling and Gable Train.
Yeah, I mean, we got tons of resources on attack style wrestling, all kinds of blog posts, free videos that you can get. And then we have more in-depth training courses that you can purchase. And then we also have our members area called the Gable Train Members Area, where we have actual a tiered system of teaching wrestling, kind of like a rank style system that martial arts use, with techniques that they need to know, complete practice plans with videos on how to run a full practice to teach these techniques and how to progress properly and use, warm-ups, drills, techniques, conditioning drills, live scenarios, everything you need to run a complete practice.
Show is part of the Mat Talk Podcast Network. For more wrestling podcasts, head over to MatTalkOnline.com.